The morning sun painted golden streaks across the windows of the exclusive Riverside Country Club. When Marcus Wellington first noticed something extraordinary happening near the tennis courts. The billionaire tech mogul had arrived early for his usual business meeting. But what he witnessed would shake him to his core and change everything he thought he knew about his 8-year-old son. Marcus had built his empire on precision, control, and measurable results. His company developed artificial intelligence systems that could process millions of data points in seconds. Yet he stood frozen watching a scene that defied every algorithm he'd ever created. There, on the perfectly manicured lawn beside the courts, sat his son Oliver with a woman he'd never seen before. Oliver had been born profoundly deaf. 3 years of expensive specialists, cutting-edge hearing aids, and the most advanced cochlear implants money could buy had yielded minimal progress. The boy communicated primarily through sign language with his interpreter, Mrs. Chen, who accompanied him everywhere. Marcus had accepted this reality, though it gnawed at him daily that his vast resources couldn't solve this one crucial problem. But something was different this morning. Oliver wasn't using sign language. He wasn't wearing his usual frustrated expression that appeared whenever adults tried to make him speak. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the grass, completely captivated by the woman across from him. She had shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wore faded jeans with a navy blue polo shirt. Nothing about her screamed expensive specialist or miracle worker. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't the woman herself, but what surrounded them. 3 dogs of varying sizes formed a perfect semicircle around Oliver and the stranger. A golden retriever sat attentively to the left, a German shepherd maintained perfect posture on the right, and a small beagle rested directly in front of them. The animals weren't just sitting randomly. They were positioned with the kind of precision Marcus recognized from his own boardroom presentations. The woman raised her hand in what looked like a simple gesture. All 3 dogs immediately shifted position, moving clockwise around Oliver in a synchronized pattern that seemed almost choreographed. Oliver's eyes widened with delight, and then something incredible happened. A sound emerged from his lips. Not words exactly, but a vocalization that Marcus hadn't heard from his son in months. Marcus stepped closer, careful to remain hidden behind a large oak tree. He pulled out his phone, not to record, but to check the time. His meeting with the Japanese investors was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes, but he couldn't tear himself away from whatever was unfolding before him. The woman noticed Oliver's vocalization and immediately responded with an encouraging smile. She pointed to the golden retriever and made a specific hand movement. The dog barked once, a clear, sharp sound that cut through the morning air. Then she turned to Oliver and repeated the same hand movement, but this time she opened her mouth and made a sound herself. Not a bark, but something closer to a vocalized breath. Oliver watched intently, his small face scrunched in concentration. Marcus had seen this expression before during their sessions with speech therapists, but there was something different about it now. The usual tension and frustration were absent, replaced by what could only be described as curiosity and engagement. The beagle was next. Another hand signal, another bark, but this one higher-pitched and sharper than the golden retrievers. The woman again mimicked the gesture toward Oliver, this time producing a different sound. Oliver tilted his head, processing the pattern, and then opened his mouth. What came out wasn't perfect, but it was unmistakably an attempt at vocalization that matched the rhythm of the beagle's bark. Marcus's hands began to shake slightly as he gripped his phone tighter. In 3 years of expensive therapy sessions, Oliver had never shown this level of engagement or produced sounds with such clear intentionality. Who was this woman, and what was she doing that an army of specialists had failed to accomplish? The German Shepherd's turn came with a deeper, more resonant bark. The pattern continued, but this time something remarkable happened. When the woman made her gesture toward Oliver, he didn't just vocalize. He looked directly at her, made eye contact in a way that Marcus rarely saw from his son, and produced a sound that was clearly attempting to match not just the rhythm, but the tone of what he'd heard. The woman's face lit up with genuine excitement. She clapped her hands together, and all 3 dogs immediately sat at attention. Then she did something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. She pointed to herself and very clearly said, "Sarah." Then she pointed to Oliver and waited. Oliver looked at the dogs, then at Sarah, then back at the dogs. His mouth moved silently for a moment, as if he were practicing. Then, in a voice that was quiet but unmistakably clear, he said, "Oliver." The sound of his son's name, spoken by his son's own voice for the first time in years, hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had to steady himself against the oak tree, his expensive Italian suit suddenly feeling constraining against his chest as his breathing became shallow. Sarah's response was immediate and enthusiastic, but not overwhelming. She smiled and nodded, then repeated his name back to him. "Oliver." The dogs seemed to sense the significance of the moment, because they all remained perfectly still, as if they understood they were witnessing something important. But Sarah wasn't finished. She pointed to the golden retriever and said, "Max." Then she looked at Oliver expectantly. Oliver studied the dog for a moment, then looked at Sarah, and with careful deliberation said, "Max." His pronunciation wasn't perfect, but the word was recognizable, intentional, and most importantly, it was communication. Marcus realized his phone was buzzing insistently in his hand. The Japanese investors were probably wondering where he was, but he couldn't move. This moment felt more important than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. His son was speaking, not just making sounds or attempting to mimic, but actually communicating with purpose and understanding. The pattern continued with the other 2 dogs, Bella for the Beagle and Rex for the German Shepherd. Each time Oliver listened, processed, and responded. Each vocalization was clearer than the last, more confident, more connected to genuine understanding rather than mere imitation. What struck Marcus most wasn't just that Oliver was speaking, but how he was learning. There was no frustration, no tears, no moments where he shut down or pulled away. Instead, there was engagement, curiosity, and what appeared to be genuine joy in the process of discovery. Sarah then did something that completely captured Marcus's attention. She had the 3 dogs perform a simple sequence. Max stood up, Bella rolled over, and Rex lay down. As each dog completed its action, Sarah provided a verbal cue. Up for Max, over for Bella, and down for Rex. Then she looked at Oliver and repeated the sequence, using only the verbal cues without the hand signals. Oliver watched the dogs respond to Sarah's voice commands with the same intense focus Marcus had seen him apply to complex puzzles or building blocks. When Sarah finished the sequence, she gestured for Oliver to try. He looked uncertain for a moment, glanced at each dog, then took a deep breath. "Up," he said, looking at Max. The golden retriever immediately stood. Oliver's face broke into the biggest smile Marcus had seen from him in months. "Over," he continued, turning to Bella. The beagle rolled over perfectly. "Down," he finished, and Rex obediently lay down. The success of the moment seemed to energize Oliver in a way Marcus had never witnessed. He began pointing to different dogs and saying their names, not because Sarah asked him to, but because he wanted to. He was experimenting with his voice, testing the connection between the sounds he made and the responses he received. Sarah pulled out a small notebook and showed Oliver something written on the page. Marcus was too far away to see what it was, but Oliver nodded eagerly and pointed to himself. Then he looked directly at Sarah and said something that made Marcus's knees nearly buckle. "Thank you." The words were slightly slurred, not perfectly articulated, but they were unmistakably "thank you." Oliver had not only learned to vocalize, but was using language to express gratitude, to communicate emotion and appreciation. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time with a text message that he could see without looking directly at the screen. His assistant was wondering if he needed her to reschedule the investor meeting. For the first time in his professional career, Marcus realized that there was something more important than a business opportunity, no matter how lucrative. He needed to know who this woman was and how she had accomplished in 30 minutes what teams of specialists hadn't achieved in years. More importantly, he needed to understand if this was a fluke, a moment of unusual progress, or if Sarah had discovered something that could truly change his son's life forever. As Marcus watched Sarah begin to pack up her small bag of supplies while the dogs maintained their disciplined positions around Oliver, he realized this chance encounter was about to end. Oliver was already showing signs of disappointment, clearly not wanting the session to conclude. Sarah knelt down to Oliver's level and said something that Marcus couldn't hear, but whatever it was made Oliver nod enthusiastically. She handed him a small card, which he clutched carefully in both hands, as if it were made of gold. The three dogs fell into formation around Sarah as she stood up, but Oliver remained sitting on the grass, staring at the card in his hands. Sarah walked a few steps away, then turned back and waved. Oliver looked up, and without any prompting or encouragement, waved back and called out, "Bye, Sarah." The clarity of those two words, the intentionality behind them, and the natural way Oliver had used them to communicate genuine feeling rather than just repeat a learned response, convinced Marcus that he had just witnessed something that would change everything. As Sarah and her three dogs disappeared around the corner of the country club building, Oliver remained on the grass, looking at the card and occasionally making quiet sounds to himself. Marcus realized that his son wasn't just practicing the words he'd learned. He was thinking about them, processing the experience, and continuing to engage with language even after the formal lesson had ended. This wasn't just a breakthrough. This was a revolution in how his son related to the world around him, and Marcus knew that his life as a father would never be the same. Marcus watched his son trace the edges of the small card with his fingertips, a gesture so deliberate and focused that it reminded him of his own behavior when studying critical business documents. But this wasn't a contract or financial report Oliver was examining. This was something that had unlocked a part of him that Marcus had feared was permanently sealed away. The billionaire finally forced himself to check his phone. 7 missed calls from his assistant, 4 text messages from the Japanese investment team, and a calendar notification that his meeting should have started 12 minutes ago. Any other day, this level of professional chaos would have sent Marcus into crisis management mode. Today, he silenced his phone and slipped it back into his pocket. Oliver stood up from the grass, brushed off his khaki shorts, and began walking toward the country club entrance. Marcus quickly moved from behind the oak tree, timing his approach to make it appear as though he'd just arrived for their scheduled lunch together. Father and son often met at the club on Saturday mornings, a routine that typically involved Oliver playing quietly with his tablet, while Marcus conducted business calls between bites of his eggs Benedict. "Oliver?" Marcus called out, using the exaggerated gestures and slow speech patterns that his son's therapists had recommended. But as the word left his mouth, he realized something had shifted. The way Oliver turned toward him, the alertness in his expression, the absence of that glazed look that usually accompanied their interactions, everything felt different. His son walked directly to him, something that rarely happened without multiple prompts or Mrs. Chen's gentle guidance. Oliver held up the card Sarah had given him, and for the first time in recent memory, he made direct eye contact with his father while attempting to communicate something important. "Sarah," Oliver said clearly, pointing to the card. Then he pointed in the direction where the woman and her dogs had disappeared. "Dogs!" Marcus felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't just pride or excitement. It was something deeper, more profound. It was the recognition that his son was actively trying to share an experience with him, to include him in something meaningful that had happened. "You met Sarah and her dogs?" Marcus asked, kneeling down to Oliver's eye level. He kept his voice gentle but didn't use the overly simplified speech patterns he'd grown accustomed to using. Oliver nodded enthusiastically, then did something that nearly brought Marcus to tears. He began trying to recreate the hand gestures Sarah had used with the dogs. His movements were imprecise, but the intention was unmistakable. He was attempting to show his father what he had learned, to demonstrate the connection between gesture, sound, and response that Sarah had revealed to him. "Max," Oliver said, making a gesture that vaguely resembled what Marcus had observed from a distance. "Bella. Rex." Each name was accompanied by a different hand movement, and while the execution wasn't perfect, the pattern was clear. Marcus realized that Oliver wasn't just repeating words he'd memorized. He was explaining a system, demonstrating understanding of how different signals produce different responses. The cognitive complexity of what his son was attempting to share was staggering, especially considering that most of Oliver's previous communication had been limited to basic needs and simple preferences. "That's incredible, Oliver," Marcus said, his voice catching slightly. "Can you show me more?" What happened next would replay in Marcus's mind for weeks afterward. Oliver looked thoughtful for a moment, as if he were accessing a new part of his brain that had suddenly become available. Then he pointed to his father and very deliberately said, "Dad." The word hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. Not because Oliver had never said it before, but because of how he said it. There was intention behind it, purpose, connection. This wasn't a word produced through hours of repetitive therapy or mechanical practice. This was his son choosing to identify him, to acknowledge their relationship through spoken language. Marcus had to take a deep breath to compose himself before responding. "Yes, I'm your dad. And you're my son, Oliver." Oliver smiled, a genuine expression of happiness that seemed to light up his entire face. Then he did something that made Marcus question everything he thought he knew about his son's limitations. Oliver reached out and took his father's hand, something he rarely initiated, and began walking toward the club entrance while continuing to chatter about his experience with Sarah and the dogs. The chatter wasn't entirely clear, and Marcus couldn't understand every word, but the communication was flowing naturally. Oliver was sharing details about what had happened, expressing excitement about what he'd learned, and most remarkably, he was doing it voluntarily. There was no prompting, no structured therapy session, no carefully controlled environment. His son was simply talking to him because he wanted to share something important. As they entered the country club, Marcus noticed several staff members doing double takes. Oliver's animated conversation, his clear vocalizations, and his obvious engagement with his father created a stark contrast to the quiet, withdrawn child they were accustomed to seeing. The hostess, a woman named Jennifer who had worked at the club for over a decade, looked genuinely startled. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," she said, but her attention was clearly focused on Oliver, who was continuing to gesture and vocalize about his morning experience. "Oliver seems particularly chatty today." "Yes, he does," Marcus replied, still processing the magnitude of what was happening. "We'll take our usual table." As they walked through the dining room toward their regular spot by the windows, Marcus found himself seeing the space differently. The elegant decor, the hushed conversations of other wealthy families, the carefully orchestrated atmosphere of privilege and exclusivity, all of it seemed less important than the small hand holding his and the voice beside him, attempting to process and share a transformative experience. Oliver climbed into his chair and immediately placed Sarah's card on the white linen tablecloth. He pointed to it and looked at his father expectantly, as if waiting for Marcus to ask the right question or make the appropriate response. "Tell me about Sarah," Marcus said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. What followed was the longest conversation Marcus had ever had with his son. It wasn't perfect by any conventional measure. Oliver's pronunciation was inconsistent, his grammar was basic, and he frequently paused to think or struggled to find the right words. But it was communication in its purest form. A child sharing wonder and excitement with his parent, using whatever tools were available to bridge the gap between internal experience and external expression. Oliver talked about how the dogs listened to words instead of just hand signals. He described the feeling of making sounds that created responses from the animals. He attempted to explain the connection between what Sarah did and what the dogs did, using simple language but demonstrating complex understanding. Most remarkably, Oliver began asking questions. "Why dogs listen?" he asked at one point, his face scrunched in concentration. "How words make dogs move." Marcus realized that his son wasn't just learning to speak. He was learning to think out loud, to use language as a tool for exploring ideas and understanding the world around him. The questions weren't just requests for information. They were evidence of a mind actively engaging with new concepts and seeking to expand understanding. "I think dogs listen because they're trained to understand that certain sounds mean certain things," Marcus explained, choosing his words carefully but not oversimplifying. "Sarah probably taught them that when she says specific words, they should do specific actions." Oliver nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Can I learn like dogs?" The question stopped Marcus cold. It was such a sophisticated inquiry, demonstrating not only understanding of the learning process he'd observed, but also the ability to see parallels between his own potential development and what he'd witnessed in the animals. "You are learning like the dogs," Marcus said softly. "You're learning that words can make things happen, that speaking can help you share what you're thinking and feeling." Oliver considered this for a moment, then picked up the card again. "More Sarah?" he asked hopefully. Marcus studied the card his son was holding. It was simple, white cardstock with elegant black lettering. "Sarah Mitchell, Canine Communications Specialist," it read, followed by a phone number and an email address. At the bottom, in smaller text, it said, "Bridging the gap between human and animal understanding." The description intrigued Marcus. This wasn't a traditional dog trainer or even a speech therapist. Sarah appeared to specialize in something that combined animal behavior with human communication, a field that Marcus hadn't even known existed. "Would you like to see Sarah again?" Marcus asked. Oliver's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Yes, more dogs, more words." Marcus pulled out his phone, no longer concerned about the missed business calls or the rescheduled investor meeting. He had discovered something far more valuable than any corporate opportunity. He had found someone who could unlock his son's potential in ways he'd never imagined possible. As he prepared to dial Sarah's number, Marcus realized that this phone call would likely be the most important business negotiation of his life. Not because it involved millions of dollars or corporate acquisitions, but because it could determine whether the breakthrough he'd witnessed that morning was a one-time miracle or the beginning of a complete transformation in his son's life. Oliver sat across from him, still chattering quietly to himself and occasionally looking up to share a new thought or observation. The change in his son's demeanor, his engagement level, and his willingness to communicate was so dramatic that Marcus found himself questioning whether he'd been seeing clearly before this morning. Had Oliver always possessed this capacity for language and connection, but simply lacked the right key to unlock it? Had years of traditional therapy approaches been addressing the wrong aspect of his son's challenges? And most importantly, could Sarah Mitchell and her unconventional methods provide a pathway to the kind of breakthrough that no amount of money had previously been able to purchase? As Marcus scrolled through his contacts to find a quiet moment to make the call, he realized that for the first time since Oliver's diagnosis, he felt something he'd almost forgotten was possible. Hope. Not the desperate hope of a parent clinging to expensive treatments and miracle cures, but genuine, evidence-based hope rooted in what he'd actually witnessed his son accomplish. The conversation at their table continued, with Oliver growing more animated and expressive with each passing minute. Other diners began to notice, some smiling at the obvious joy radiating from their table, others looking curious about the dramatic change in the usually quiet child who frequented the club. Marcus found himself studying his son's face, really looking at him perhaps for the first time in months. The frustration and withdrawal that had become Oliver's default expression were gone, replaced by alertness, curiosity, and something that looked remarkably like confidence. His son was discovering that he had a voice, and more importantly, that his voice could create connection and understanding with the world around him. The implications of this discovery were staggering, not just for Oliver's future development, but for their relationship as father and son. For years, Marcus had thrown money and resources at Oliver's challenges, hiring the best specialists, purchasing the most advanced equipment, and creating elaborate support systems. But he'd never found anything that created the kind of genuine engagement and natural learning he'd witnessed that morning. Sarah Mitchell had accomplished more in 30 minutes with 3 dogs and some simple gestures than teams of expensive experts had achieved in years of structured therapy. The question now was whether this breakthrough could be sustained, developed, and expanded into a comprehensive approach that would give Oliver the communication skills and confidence he needed to navigate the world. As Oliver continued to practice the words he'd learned, occasionally looking up to gauge his father's reaction and approval, Marcus realized that this unexpected encounter had revealed something profound about the nature of learning, communication, and human potential. Sometimes the most sophisticated solutions weren't found in expensive clinics or advanced technology. Sometimes they emerged from the simple recognition that every individual, regardless of their challenges, possessed unique pathways to growth and connection that just needed the right catalyst to activate. Marcus stared at the card in his hands. The simple contact information representing possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. The elegant script seemed to mock years of failed attempts with conventional approaches, yet it also offered something he'd been searching for desperately: a genuine pathway forward. Oliver had finished his usual Saturday lunch of chicken fingers and apple slices, but instead of retreating into his tablet as he normally did, he remained engaged with the world around him. Every few minutes, he would look up from the card he'd been studying and attempt to share another detail about his morning encounter with Sarah and her dogs. "Dog's smart," Oliver said suddenly, his voice carrying a tone of genuine amazement. "Listen good." Marcus nodded, encouraging his son to continue. The fact that Oliver was making unprompted observations, drawing conclusions, and expressing them verbally was still almost too remarkable to believe. "They are very smart," Marcus agreed. "What made you think they were smart?" Oliver's face scrunched in concentration, the same expression Marcus had observed during his encounter with Sarah. But now he recognized it differently. This wasn't confusion or frustration. This was his son actively processing complex thoughts and working to translate them into language. "Sarah, say word," Oliver began slowly, his hands moving as if he were trying to capture the memory with gestures. "Dogs know. Dogs do right thing." The sophistication of this observation struck Marcus profoundly. Oliver wasn't just recounting what had happened. He was analyzing the cause and effect relationship between verbal commands and behavioral responses. He was demonstrating understanding of communication as a system, rather than just a collection of random sounds. Marcus pulled out his phone and found himself staring at Sarah's number. The weight of this decision felt enormous. He'd contacted countless specialists over the years, each promising breakthrough approaches and revolutionary methods. Most had delivered incremental progress at best, leaving Oliver more frustrated and withdrawn after each failed attempt. But what he'd witnessed that morning was different. Sarah hadn't been trying to fix Oliver or correct his deficits. Instead, she'd found a way to connect with his existing strengths and interests, using them as a bridge to new capabilities. "Oliver," Marcus said carefully, "would you like me to call Sarah? Maybe we could arrange for you to spend more time with her and the dogs." His son's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Oliver's entire face lit up, and he began nodding vigorously while clutching the card against his chest. "Yes, yes," he exclaimed, his voice carrying more excitement than Marcus had heard in months. "More Sarah, more dogs, more words." Marcus dialed the number, his heart racing in a way that reminded him of his first major business presentation decades earlier. The phone rang twice before a warm, professional voice answered. "Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell." "Ms. Mitchell, this is Marcus Wellington. I believe you just worked with my son Oliver this morning at the Riverside Country Club." There was a brief pause, and Marcus could hear what sounded like dogs barking softly in the background. "Oh yes, Oliver." Sarah's voice brightened immediately. "What a remarkable young man. He showed incredible focus and natural intuition with the communication exercises. How can I help you, Mr. Wellington?" Marcus was struck by how she referred to what had happened as communication exercises rather than therapy or treatment. The terminology seemed important, suggesting an approach based on skill building rather than deficit correction. "I witnessed your session with Oliver from a distance," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully. "I've never seen him engage with learning in the way he did with you this morning. I'm hoping we might discuss the possibility of additional sessions." I'd be happy to discuss that, Sarah replied. Oliver demonstrated some really exceptional abilities today. His pattern recognition skills are outstanding, and his willingness to experiment with vocalization suggests he's ready for more advanced communication work. Again, Marcus noted her language choices. She was describing Oliver's strengths and readiness rather than his limitations or delays. This perspective alone set her apart from every other professional they'd worked with. Could we perhaps schedule a meeting to discuss your approach in more detail? Marcus asked. I'd like to understand what made this morning so successful and whether it represents a sustainable path forward. Absolutely. I should mention that my work combines elements of animal-assisted communication therapy with traditional speech development techniques. It's not a conventional approach, but for certain children, particularly those who respond well to pattern-based learning, it can be remarkably effective. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with cautious optimism. Sarah was describing exactly what he'd observed, a method that worked with Oliver's natural learning style rather than against it. When would be convenient for you to meet? Marcus asked. I have availability tomorrow afternoon if that works for you. I could come to your home, or if Oliver would be more comfortable, we could meet at the club again. Sometimes familiar environments help children feel more confident during initial consultations. Marcus glanced at Oliver, who was watching the phone conversation with intense interest, clearly understanding that they were discussing his future sessions with Sarah. The club would be perfect, Marcus said. Same location as this morning, say 2 o'clock? That sounds ideal. I'll bring Max, Bella, and Rex along. Oliver seemed to form particularly strong connections with all three of them. As Marcus ended the call, Oliver was practically bouncing in his chair with excitement. The transformation in his son's energy and engagement level was so dramatic that other diners were beginning to notice the animated child, who bore little resemblance to the quiet, withdrawn boy they'd grown accustomed to seeing. Tomorrow? Oliver asked hopefully, his eyes wide with anticipation. Tomorrow, Marcus confirmed. Sarah and the dogs will meet us here again. Oliver clapped his hands together, a gesture of pure joy that made Marcus's chest tighten with emotion. When was the last time he'd seen his son express such unfiltered happiness about anything? The remainder of their lunch passed in a blur of Oliver's continued chatter about dogs, words, and his eagerness for the next day's session. Marcus found himself really listening, not just to the words his son was saying, but to the thought processes behind them. Oliver was making connections, drawing conclusions, and expressing preferences with a clarity that had been absent from their interactions for years. The breakthrough wasn't just about speech production. It was about cognitive engagement, social connection, and emotional expression. As they prepared to leave the club, Marcus realized that his entire perspective on his son's capabilities had shifted in the span of a single morning. The child he'd thought was limited by his hearing loss was revealing himself to be someone with complex thoughts, strong preferences, and remarkable learning abilities that had simply been waiting for the right catalyst. The drive home was unlike any car ride they'd shared before. Instead of Oliver retreating into his tablet or staring silently out the window, he maintained a running commentary about everything he saw, practiced the names of Sarah's dogs, and asked questions about when they would see them again. "Dad," Oliver said suddenly from the back seat, using the clear pronunciation that still sent shivers down Marcus's spine. "Why dogs help me talk?" The question was so insightful, so fundamentally curious about the learning process itself, that Marcus had to pull over to give it the attention it deserved. "I think," Marcus said, turning to face his son, "the dogs helped you because they showed you that communication is like a game." When Sarah made sounds, the dogs understood what she wanted them to do. When you made sounds, the dogs responded to you too. You learned that your voice has power to make things happen. Oliver nodded thoughtfully, processing this explanation with the same intense focus Marcus had observed during the morning session. My voice has power, Oliver repeated slowly, as if testing the concept. Then, with growing confidence, he said it again. My voice has power. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. His son wasn't just learning to speak. He was learning to believe in his own ability to affect the world around him through communication. When they arrived home, Oliver immediately ran to find Mrs. Chen, his longtime interpreter and caregiver. Marcus watched from the doorway as his son attempted to share his morning experience with the woman who had been his primary communication partner for years. The interaction was fascinating to observe. Oliver was using a combination of sign language, spoken words, and gestures to convey what had happened. Mrs. Chen, who had worked with deaf and hard-of-hearing children for over 2 decades, looked genuinely amazed by Oliver's animated storytelling and his consistent use of vocalization alongside his signing. Mr. Wellington, Mrs. Chen said, approaching Marcus with the expression of wonder on her face. Oliver is telling me about dogs and a woman named Sarah. His communication is so much more expressive than usual. What happened this morning? Marcus shared the details of their encounter with Sarah, watching as Mrs. Chen's professional curiosity was piqued by the unconventional approach that had yielded such remarkable results. In all my years working with children with hearing differences, Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully, I've never seen a breakthrough quite like this. Oliver isn't just producing more sounds. His entire communication style has changed. He's initiating conversations, asking questions, and expressing complex ideas. That evening, as Marcus tucked Oliver into bed, his son looked up at him with bright, alert eyes and said something that would echo in Marcus's mind for hours afterward. Dad, tomorrow I learn more words. Then I tell you everything I think. The promise in that simple statement was staggering. Oliver was expressing his intention to develop language not just for basic communication, but as a tool for sharing his inner world with his father. Marcus kissed his son goodnight and retreated to his home office. But instead of opening his laptop to catch up on the business matters he'd abandoned that morning, he found himself researching everything he could find about animal-assisted communication therapy. What he discovered was a growing field that recognized the unique ways animals could serve as bridges between human potential and human achievement. Dogs, in particular, were being used to help children with various developmental challenges learn everything from social skills to academic concepts. But Sarah's approach seemed to go beyond anything Marcus could find in the existing literature. She wasn't just using dogs as motivational tools or comfort animals. She was using them as communication partners, demonstrating how language could create understanding and cooperation between species. The more Marcus read, the more he understood that what had happened that morning wasn't just a lucky coincidence or a temporary breakthrough. It was the result of Sarah's deep understanding of how learning happens, how motivation works, and how communication develops when the right conditions are present. His son had been ready for this kind of learning all along. They'd simply never found the right key to unlock his potential until Sarah and her 3 dogs had appeared on the perfectly manicured lawn of the Riverside Country Club. As Marcus finally closed his laptop and prepared for bed, he realized that his definition of success was about to change completely. For years, he'd measured progress in terms of business metrics, financial achievements, and professional recognition. Now, The most important success he could imagine was hearing his son's voice continue to grow stronger, more confident, and more expressive with each passing day. The billionaire who had built an empire on artificial intelligence was about to discover that the most sophisticated learning system in the world was the human mind when it was given the right tools and the right motivation to flourish. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Marcus woke before dawn the next morning, something that rarely happened on Sundays unless he was traveling internationally for business. But sleep had eluded him as his mind raced with possibilities and questions about what Sarah might reveal during their consultation. He found himself in the kitchen at 5:30, making coffee and reviewing emails on his tablet. But his concentration kept drifting to thoughts of Oliver and the dramatic changes that had emerged in less than 24 hours. The sound of small feet padding down the hardwood stairs interrupted his thoughts. Oliver appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his astronaut pajamas, but wide awake and alert, in a way that was unusual for him at this early hour. "Dad," Oliver said clearly, walking directly to Marcus without hesitation. "Today Sarah Day?" Marcus was struck once again by his son's clear pronunciation and the confident way he initiated the conversation. Before yesterday, Oliver's morning routine typically involved pointing to indicate his needs or using basic sign language with Mrs. Chen. "Yes, today is Sarah Day," Marcus confirmed, pulling out a chair for his son. "We'll see her and the dogs at 2 o'clock. Oliver's face broke into a wide smile, and he began what could only be described as excited chatter about his anticipation for the afternoon session. His words weren't all perfectly clear, and his grammar was still developing, but the flow of communication was natural and purposeful. "I show Sarah more," Oliver declared. "I learn dog names fast. I learn more words today." The confidence in his son's voice was breathtaking. Oliver was approaching the upcoming session not with anxiety or uncertainty, but with excitement and clear expectations for his own continued learning. Mrs. Chen arrived at 8 o'clock for her usual Sunday morning shift, but she immediately noticed the continuation of Oliver's transformed communication style. "Good morning, Oliver," she signed while speaking aloud, maintaining their established routine. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," Oliver replied, using both sign language and clear vocalization. Then he added something that made both adults stop in surprise. "Today I see Sarah and dogs. I learn more words. You want to come?" Mrs. Chen looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows. Oliver had never before invited anyone to join his activities or expressed interest in sharing his learning experiences with others. "That's very thoughtful of you to invite Mrs. Chen," Marcus said to his son. Then, turning to the older woman, he added, "You're welcome to join us if you'd like to observe Sarah's methods." "I would be very interested," Mrs. Chen replied. "Oliver's progress is remarkable, and I'd like to understand the techniques that are producing these results." The morning passed with Oliver maintaining his newfound chattiness, practicing the dog names he'd learned the day before, and asking repeated questions about when they would leave for the club. His sustained focus on the upcoming session and his ability to express his anticipation verbally demonstrated cognitive and communication advances that went far beyond simple speech production. At 1:30, they arrived at the Riverside Country Club to find Sarah already setting up in the same area where the initial encounter had occurred. Max, Bella, and Rex were positioned in their familiar semicircle, and Sarah was arranging what appeared to be a collection of colorful objects and cards on a small portable table. Oliver practically bounced out of the car when he saw the setup, calling out, "Sarah, dogs!" with unmistakable joy. Sarah turned toward them with a warm smile, and Marcus noticed that all three dogs immediately shifted their attention to Oliver, their tails wagging in what appeared to be genuine recognition and pleasure at seeing him again. "Hello, Oliver," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same warm professionalism Marcus remembered from their phone conversation. "I'm so glad you came back. The dogs have been looking forward to seeing you again." Oliver walked directly to the dogs, showing none of the hesitation or social uncertainty that typically characterized his interactions with new people or unfamiliar situations. "Max, Bella, Rex," he said clearly, pointing to each dog in turn. The animals responded to their names with tail wags and alert attention, creating an immediate atmosphere of mutual recognition and connection. "That's perfect, Oliver," Sarah said with genuine enthusiasm. "You remembered all their names correctly. Are you ready to learn some new things today?" "Yes," Oliver replied without hesitation. "I want more words." Marcus watched this exchange with fascination, noting how naturally Sarah had shifted into a teaching mode that somehow felt both structured and completely relaxed. Mrs. Chen stood beside him, equally absorbed in observing the interaction. Sarah began the session with a review of the previous day's learning, having Oliver practice the basic commands and name recognition exercises that had been so successful. But Marcus quickly realized that this wasn't just repetition for reinforcement. Sarah was using the familiar activities as a foundation for introducing more complex concepts. "Oliver, watch carefully," Sarah said, positioning herself so that all three dogs could see her clearly. "I'm going to ask Max to do something new." She made a gesture that Marcus hadn't seen before, and Max immediately walked to the small table and picked up a red ball in his mouth, then returned to his position in front of Oliver. "Bring," Sarah said clearly, making the same gesture toward Oliver. Max brought the red ball. Oliver's eyes lit up with understanding. He was seeing the connection between the gesture, the verbal command, and the specific action Sarah wanted the dog to perform. "Now you try," Sarah encouraged, placing several different colored balls on the table. "Can you ask Bella to bring the blue ball?" Oliver looked at the table, located the blue ball, then turned to Bella with intense concentration. He attempted to replicate Sarah's gesture, and while his movement wasn't exactly the same, his intention was clear. "Bring," he said, pointing toward the blue ball. Bella immediately responded, walking to the table, selecting the blue ball, and bringing it to Oliver. The success of this interaction produced an expression of pure delight on Oliver's face that Marcus had never seen before. "Excellent," Sarah exclaimed. "You just learned how to give specific instructions. You told Bella exactly what you wanted her to do, and she understood you perfectly." What happened next would reshape Marcus's understanding of his son's cognitive capabilities forever. Oliver looked thoughtfully at the remaining balls on the table, then at Rex, who was waiting patiently for his turn. Without any prompting from Sarah, Oliver made the bring gesture and said, "Bring green ball, Rex." The dog immediately complied, and Oliver turned to his father and Mrs. Chen with an expression of triumph and excitement. "I tell dogs what to do," he announced proudly. "They listen to me." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. His son had just demonstrated problem-solving skills, pattern recognition, independent thinking, and the ability to generalize learning to new situations. These were capabilities that expensive neurological assessments had suggested were beyond Oliver's reach. Sarah caught Marcus's eye and smiled knowingly. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "Oliver has remarkable natural abilities that have been waiting for the right opportunity to emerge." Sarah's assessment proved prophetic as the session continued to unfold in ways that defied every expectation Marcus had developed about his son's capabilities. What started as a simple exercise in following commands evolved into something far more sophisticated. "Oliver," Sarah said, arranging the colored balls in a specific pattern on the table. "I want to try something different now. Instead of telling the dogs what to bring, can you watch what they do and tell me about it?" She made a subtle gesture to Max, who walked to the table, selected the yellow ball, and brought it to Sarah. Then she turned to Oliver expectantly. Oliver studied the interaction for a moment, his face showing the intense concentration that Marcus was beginning to recognize as his son's thinking expression. "Max, bring yellow ball to Sarah," Oliver said slowly but clearly. The sophistication of this response struck everyone present. Oliver wasn't just naming objects or repeating commands. He was observing, analyzing, and describing complex interactions using proper sentence structure and multiple concepts. "Perfect," Sarah exclaimed. "You just told a story about what happened. You described who did what, with which object, and to whom. That's very advanced communication." Mrs. Chen leaned closer to Marcus and whispered, "In traditional therapy, this level of narrative description typically takes months to develop. Oliver is demonstrating it spontaneously." Sarah continued pushing the boundaries of what Oliver could accomplish. She had Bella perform a sequence of actions, picking up the blue ball, carrying it to Rex, and then both dogs returning to their original positions. "Tell me the whole story of what just happened," Sarah requested. Oliver watched the sequence with laser focus, then began narrating with remarkable accuracy. "Bella take blue ball. Bella go to Rex. Bella give ball to Rex. Then Bella and Rex come back." Marcus felt his hands begin to shake slightly. His son was demonstrating sequential memory, cause and effect understanding, and the ability to organize complex information into coherent narrative structure. These were cognitive skills that neurological evaluations had suggested were significantly delayed. "Outstanding, Oliver," Sarah said with genuine enthusiasm. "Now I want to try something even more challenging. Can you tell Max and Bella to work together to bring me 2 different balls?" The complexity of this request was staggering. Oliver would need to coordinate instructions to 2 different animals, specify different objects for each, and ensure they both completed their tasks simultaneously. Oliver stared at the table, which now held 5 different colored balls. His expression grew thoughtful as he processed the multi-layered challenge Sarah had presented. "Max," he said finally, making the bring gesture. "Bring red ball." Then he turned to Bella and repeated the gesture. "Bella, bring green ball." Both dogs immediately responded, walking to the table together, selecting their assigned balls, and returning to present them to Sarah simultaneously. The success of this coordination task produced an expression of amazement on Oliver's face that quickly shifted to something Marcus had rarely seen from his son: pride. Not the simple pleasure of completing an activity, but genuine pride in his ability to solve a complex problem and achieve a challenging goal. "I did it!" Oliver exclaimed, his voice carrying more confidence than Marcus had heard since the accident that had damaged his hearing. "I tell 2 dogs different things, and they do it." Sarah knelt down to Oliver's level, her expression serious but warm. "Oliver, do you understand what just happened? You gave instructions to 2 different individuals. You made sure each one knew exactly what you wanted them to do, and you coordinated their actions to achieve a specific result. That's called leadership." The word seemed to resonate with Oliver in a profound way. He repeated it quietly to himself several times, as if testing how it felt in his mouth and what it meant in his mind. "Leadership," he said finally, looking directly at Sarah. "I can do leadership." Marcus felt tears threatening to spill over. His son wasn't just learning to speak. He was discovering that he could influence the world around him, that his communication could create cooperation and achieve results. The implications for his future development were staggering. Sarah stood up and addressed Marcus and Mrs. Chen directly. "What Oliver is demonstrating isn't just speech development or even communication skills. He's showing us advanced cognitive processing, problem-solving abilities, and social understanding that suggest his potential extends far beyond what traditional assessments have indicated." "Tuta," Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "The sequential processing, the ability to coordinate multiple instructions, the narrative skills, all of these suggest that Oliver's cognitive development has been progressing normally despite the communication barriers created by his hearing differences." Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Are you saying that Oliver's intellectual capabilities have been intact all along, but we simply couldn't access them because of the communication challenges?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Sarah replied. "Many children with hearing differences are significantly underestimated because traditional assessment methods rely heavily on verbal responses and auditory processing. Oliver's breakthrough isn't just about learning to speak. It's about finding a pathway to demonstrate the sophisticated thinking that's been happening in his mind all along." The weight of this revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. For years, he'd accepted assessments that suggested Oliver's cognitive development was delayed. He'd structured their entire approach to parenting around the assumption that his son's intellectual capabilities were limited. But watching Oliver coordinate complex instructions, narrate detailed sequences, and demonstrate problem-solving skills that impressed professional educators, Marcus realized how profoundly he'd underestimated his own child. Oliver seemed oblivious to the adult conversation happening around him. He was engaged in what appeared to be an independent experiment, practicing different combinations of commands with the three dogs and observing their responses with scientific curiosity. "Rex, sit," he said clearly. The German Shepherd immediately complied. "Bella, come." The beagle trotted over to him. "Max, stay." The golden retriever remained in his original position. Then Oliver did something that made all three adults stop talking and stare. He began giving commands in sequence, creating a complex choreography of animal movements that he orchestrated entirely through verbal instructions. "Rex, come to table." "Bella, sit where Rex was sitting." "Max, come to where Bella was sitting." All three dogs executed these instructions flawlessly, creating a rotating pattern that Oliver had designed and implemented entirely through spoken communication. "Now everybody sit," Oliver commanded, and all three dogs immediately settled into sitting positions in their new locations. Oliver turned to the adults with an expression of pure satisfaction. "I make dog dance," he announced proudly. Sarah's face lit up with professional excitement. "Oliver, you just created a choreographed sequence and directed three independent performers to execute it perfectly. That requires spatial reasoning, sequential planning, and leadership skills that many adults struggle with." Marcus stared at his son with a mixture of amazement and something that felt uncomfortably like guilt. How many opportunities had he missed to recognize and nurture these capabilities? How many times had he accepted limitations that were imposed by assessment methods rather than actual potential? "Can we schedule regular sessions?" Marcus asked Sarah, his voice carrying an urgency that surprised him. "I want Oliver to have every opportunity to develop these abilities." Absolutely," Sarah replied. "But I want to suggest something that might be even more effective. Instead of just scheduled sessions, what if we created opportunities for Oliver to practice these leadership and communication skills in various settings? The goal isn't just to work with my dogs, but to help Oliver understand that his communication abilities can be effective in many different situations. Mrs. Chen interjected thoughtfully, "That makes perfect sense from a developmental perspective. Generalizing skills across multiple environments and contexts is crucial for sustainable learning." Oliver had been listening to this conversation with obvious interest, and now he approached the adults with a question that demonstrated just how much he was processing and understanding. "Can I teach other kids to talk to dogs?" he asked, his expression serious and thoughtful. The question was so unexpected, so sophisticated in its implications, that Marcus felt his breath catch. His son wasn't just thinking about his own learning. He was conceptualizing how he might share his new abilities with others, how he might take on a teaching role himself. Sarah smiled broadly. "That's a wonderful idea, Oliver. Teaching others is one of the best ways to strengthen your own skills and help other children discover their abilities too." "There's actually a program I've been developing," Sarah continued, addressing Marcus. "It's designed for children with various communication challenges. Oliver could potentially participate as both a learner and a peer mentor, depending on his comfort level and continued progress." Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with protective caution. The idea of Oliver in a leadership role, helping other children while continuing his own development, was almost too good to be true. "What would that involve?" Marcus asked. "Small groups of children working with trained therapy dogs to develop communication, leadership, and social skills," Sarah explained. "The children learn together, support each other, and often make breakthrough progress when they see peers facing similar challenges achieving success." Oliver had been following this conversation intently, and now he spoke up with characteristic directness. "I want to help other kids learn to talk to dogs. I want to teach them leadership." The confidence in his voice, the clarity of his intention, and the generosity of his desire to help others created a moment that Marcus knew he would remember for the rest of his life. His son, who just days ago had been viewed as having significant developmental delays, was now expressing interest in becoming a mentor and teacher for other children facing communication challenges. "We'll start with regular individual sessions," Sarah said. "And as Oliver continues to develop confidence and skills, we can explore opportunities for him to work with other children." As the session began to wind down, Sarah introduced one final exercise that would test the limits of Oliver's newly discovered abilities. "Oliver, I want you to create your own command for the dogs," she said. "Think of something you'd like them to do. Make up a word or gesture for it, and see if you can teach them to understand your new command." This challenge required creativity, innovation, and the understanding that communication is something that can be created and developed rather than just learned from others. Oliver stood quietly for several moments, his face showing deep concentration. Then he walked to the center of the area where all three dogs could see him clearly. "Circle," he said, making a sweeping gesture with his arm. "Dogs make circle around me." None of the dogs responded immediately, since this wasn't a command they'd been trained to recognize. But Oliver seemed to understand that teaching required patience and repetition. He walked to Max, gently guided the dog to a position on his left side, then repeated, "Circle." He moved to Bella, positioned her in front of him, and again said, "Circle." Finally, he guided Rex to his right side and repeated the command. Then he stepped back and said, "Circle," while making his sweeping gesture. The dogs, having been guided through the pattern once, seemed to understand what Oliver wanted. They began moving into the circular formation he'd established, creating a perfect circle around him. Oliver's face exploded into the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen from his son. "I teach dogs new word," he exclaimed. "I make new command, and they learn it." The significance of this achievement was staggering. Oliver had not only learned to use existing communication systems, but had demonstrated the ability to create new forms of communication and teach them to others. Sarah was clearly as impressed as Marcus and Mrs. Chen. "Oliver, you just did something that professional dog trainers spend months learning to do. You identified a new behavior you wanted to see, created a command for it, taught that command to 3 different animals, and successfully implemented it. That's advanced training methodology." As they prepared to end the session, Marcus realized that his understanding of his son's capabilities had been completely transformed. Oliver wasn't a child with limitations who needed to be helped and accommodated. He was a young person with remarkable abilities who had simply been waiting for the right opportunities to demonstrate his potential. "Same time next week?" Sarah asked as she began gathering her equipment. "Actually," Marcus said, surprising himself with his response. "Could we schedule something sooner? And could we discuss the possibility of more intensive work? I feel like we've discovered something important, and I don't want to lose momentum." Oliver immediately perked up at this suggestion. "More days with Sarah and dogs?" he asked hopefully. "If that's what you want," Marcus replied, realizing that for the first time in years, he was asking his son about his preferences rather than making decisions for him. "Yes," Oliver said without hesitation. "I want to learn more words, more leadership, and I want to help other kids too." As they walked back toward the car, Oliver maintained a steady stream of chatter about everything he'd learned, his plans for the next session, and his excitement about the possibility of working with other children. Mrs. Chen walked beside Marcus, shaking her head in amazement. "Mr. Wellington, in 20 years of working with children with hearing differences, I've never seen progress this rapid or this comprehensive. Oliver isn't just learning to communicate, he's discovering that he's capable of far more than anyone imagined." Marcus nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had occurred. "I feel like we've been looking at Oliver through the wrong lens for years. Instead of seeing what he couldn't do, we should have been looking for ways to reveal what he could do." "That's exactly right," Mrs. Chen agreed. "And now that we've found an approach that works with his natural strengths and interests, I suspect we're going to see continued breakthroughs that surprise all of us." As they reached the car, Oliver turned back toward the area where they'd been working with Sarah and the dogs. "Thank you, Max. Thank you, Bella. Thank you, Rex," he called out, his voice carrying across the manicured grounds of the country club. The dogs, who were being loaded into Sarah's vehicle, all turned toward Oliver's voice, their tails wagging in what appeared to be genuine affection and recognition. "See you soon," Oliver added, waving enthusiastically. Marcus watched this exchange with a mixture of joy and profound gratitude. His son was not only communicating effectively, but was demonstrating social awareness, empathy, and the kind of natural warmth that created genuine connections with others. The drive home was filled with Oliver's continued excitement about his progress and his plans for future sessions. But what struck Marcus most was how his son's entire demeanor had changed. The withdrawn, frustrated child who had struggled with communication had been replaced by a confident, engaged young person who saw endless possibilities for learning and growth. "Dad," Oliver said as they pulled into their driveway, "I think I can learn to do lots of things I didn't know I could do." The simple profundity of this statement took Marcus's breath away. His son had discovered not just the ability to communicate, but the understanding that his potential extended far beyond what anyone had previously imagined. That evening, as Marcus tucked Oliver into bed, his son looked up at him with bright, alert eyes and said something that would reshape Marcus's priorities for years to come. "Dad, tomorrow can we call other kids who need help talking? I want to show them about dogs and leadership and making new words." Marcus kissed his son goodnight and walked to his home office. But instead of opening his laptop to review business reports, he found himself staring out the window and thinking about potential, opportunity, and the incredible journey that lay ahead. His son had taught him that the most sophisticated breakthroughs don't always come from the most expensive interventions. Sometimes they emerge when the right person recognizes abilities that have been waiting for the perfect moment to shine. The billionaire who had built an empire on technological innovation was about to discover that his greatest success would be watching his son build confidence, communication skills, and leadership abilities that would serve him for the rest of his life. The following morning, Marcus woke with a clarity of purpose he hadn't experienced since the early days of building his company. But this time, the urgent mission wasn't about market dominance or quarterly earnings. It was about ensuring his son's remarkable progress continued and expanded into something that could transform not just Oliver's life, but potentially the lives of countless other children. He found Oliver already awake in the kitchen, practicing the commands he'd learned with Sarah's dogs by giving instructions to his stuffed animals lined up on the breakfast table. "Bear, sit," Oliver said clearly to his teddy bear, positioning it upright. "Elephant, bring," he continued, moving his stuffed elephant closer to himself. "Lion, circle," he finished, walking the toy lion in a small circle around his cereal bowl. Marcus paused in the doorway, struck by the sophistication of what his son was doing. Oliver wasn't just repeating memorized commands. He was applying the communication principles he'd learned to completely different contexts, demonstrating that he understood the underlying concepts rather than just the specific applications. "Good morning, Oliver," Marcus said, joining his son at the table. "I see you're practicing your leadership skills." Oliver looked up with the bright, engaged expression that had become his new default since meeting Sarah. "Dad, stuffed animals don't listen like real dogs, but I can still practice the words and remember how to make the gestures." The metacognitive awareness in this statement was remarkable. Oliver was thinking about his own learning process, identifying the differences between practice scenarios and real applications, and making conscious decisions about how to maintain his skills. "That's very smart thinking," Marcus said, sitting down across from his son. "You're figuring out how to keep learning even when Sarah and the dogs aren't here." Oliver nodded seriously. "Mrs. Chen says practice makes better. Not perfect, because perfect is too hard, but better is good." Marcus smiled at his son's adaptation of the familiar phrase, noting how Oliver had modified it to reflect a more realistic and achievable goal. This kind of practical wisdom suggested emotional maturity alongside his obvious intellectual capabilities. "Oliver, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about wanting to help other children," Marcus began carefully. "How would you feel about meeting some kids who might benefit from learning the same things you're learning?" His son's face lit up immediately. "Really? Other kids want to learn about dogs and leadership and making new words?" "I think some children would be very interested," Marcus replied. Sarah mentioned a program where kids work together to develop communication skills. You could learn alongside them and maybe help them too. Oliver set down his spoon and gave Marcus his complete attention. The same focused concentration he applied to complex problems. Would the kids be like me? Kids who have trouble talking sometimes? The sensitivity and awareness in this question revealed Oliver's growing understanding of his own challenges and his ability to empathize with others who faced similar difficulties. Some of them might have challenges similar to yours, Marcus said honestly. Others might have different kinds of communication difficulties. But they would all be kids who could benefit from learning about leadership and working with animals. Oliver considered this for several moments, his expression thoughtful and serious. I want to meet them, he decided. But Dad, what if I'm not good enough at teaching yet? What if I make mistakes? The vulnerability in his son's question touched Marcus deeply. Oliver was demonstrating self-awareness about his developing abilities, while also showing the courage to consider taking on new challenges. Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning new things, Marcus said gently. The important thing is that you want to help others and you're willing to try. Sarah will be there to guide all of you. And you'll be there too? Oliver asked, seeking reassurance. If you want me there, I'll be there, Marcus confirmed. Oliver smiled, his confidence returning. Then I want to try helping other kids. Maybe we can all learn together and all get better at leadership. That afternoon, Marcus called Sarah to discuss the possibility of integrating Oliver into her group program. What he learned during their conversation would reshape his understanding of both his son's potential and the broader implications of Sarah's work. Oliver's progress has been exceptional, Sarah explained. But what makes him particularly valuable as a potential peer mentor is his natural empathy and his genuine excitement about communication. Many children in the program struggle with motivation because traditional therapy approaches can feel clinical and frustrating. Marcus settled into his home office chair, giving Sarah his complete attention. How would the group dynamic work? Typically, I work with 3 to 4 children at a time, each with their own specific communication goals, Sarah said. The children learn from watching each other succeed, and they often develop friendships that extend beyond our sessions. Oliver's enthusiasm and his rapid skill development could inspire other children who might be feeling discouraged. What kinds of challenges do the other children face? Marcus asked, wanting to ensure Oliver would be entering an appropriate environment. The current group includes Emma, a 7-year-old with selective mutism who speaks freely at home but becomes completely silent in social situations. There's also David, a 9-year-old with autism who has extensive vocabulary but struggles with social communication. And Maria, an 8-year-old with speech apraxia who understands everything but has difficulty coordinating the muscle movements needed for clear speech. Marcus could immediately see how Oliver's experience and progress might relate to each of these children's challenges. How do you think Oliver would fit into this group? I think he could be tremendously helpful, Sarah replied. Emma might benefit from seeing how Oliver gained confidence through working with the dogs. David might connect with Oliver's systematic approach to learning commands and patterns. And Maria might be encouraged by watching someone else work through pronunciation challenges and achieve clear communication. The more Sarah explained, the more excited Marcus became about the possibilities. This wasn't just about Oliver receiving additional therapy. It was about him becoming part of a community of children who were all discovering their own unique pathways to effective communication. When could we start? Marcus asked. I'd like to arrange a brief individual session with Oliver first, just to assess his readiness for group work and discuss what peer mentoring might involve. Sarah suggested. If that goes well, he could join the group as early as this weekend. After ending the call, Marcus found Oliver in the living room, reading a picture book aloud to Mrs. Chen. The fact that his son was voluntarily practicing reading and speaking simultaneously demonstrated the kind of integrated skill development that traditional therapy approaches rarely achieved. "Oliver," Marcus said, joining them in the living room, "I just spoke with Sarah about the possibility of you working with other children. She'd like to meet with you first, to talk about what that might be like." Oliver immediately perked up with interest. "When can we meet with Sarah?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if that works for you." "Yes," Oliver exclaimed. "I want to tell Sarah about how I practiced with my stuffed animals and about the new command I invented." Mrs. Chen looked curious. "What new command did you invent, Oliver?" Oliver's face took on the expression of concentration that Marcus now recognized as his son preparing to explain something complex. "I made up a command called Together. It means all the animals should come close to each other and sit in a group." He demonstrated with his stuffed animals, saying "Together," while making a gathering gesture with both hands. Then he positioned all the toys in a tight cluster. "I think real dogs would understand this command, because it's about cooperation and working as a team," Oliver explained with remarkable insight. Mrs. Chen exchanged an amazed look with Marcus. Oliver wasn't just creating new commands randomly. He was thinking strategically about communication concepts and developing instructions that reflected sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. The next day's session with Sarah confirmed what Marcus had begun to suspect. Oliver wasn't just recovering lost abilities or catching up to expected developmental milestones. He was demonstrating exceptional capabilities that suggested genuine giftedness in areas related to communication, leadership, and social understanding. "Oliver, before we talk about working with other children, I want to see how you've been practicing," Sarah began, settling into their familiar setup with Max, Bella, and Rex. Oliver immediately took charge of the session in a way that surprised even Marcus. "Sarah, I want to show you my new command first, and then I want to practice some harder things that might help other kids." The confidence and initiative in Oliver's approach was remarkable. He was setting his own learning agenda and expressing clear intentions about his goals. "I'd love to see your new command," Sarah said with genuine enthusiasm. Oliver positioned himself in the center of the three dogs and made his gathering gesture. "Together," he said clearly. The dogs, who had never heard this command before, looked uncertain for a moment. But Oliver seemed to understand that teaching required patience and demonstration. He walked to each dog individually, gently guiding them closer to each other while repeating "together" with his gesture. After 2 repetitions, he stepped back and gave the command again. This time, all 3 dogs moved closer to each other, creating the tight group formation Oliver had envisioned. "Outstanding!" "Ha!" Sarah exclaimed. "Oliver, you just demonstrated advanced training principles. You understood that new commands need to be taught gradually. You used physical guidance combined with verbal cues, and you had the patience to repeat the process until the dogs understood what you wanted." Oliver beamed with pride, but then his expression shifted to something more thoughtful. "Sarah, if other kids saw me teach dogs a new command, do you think it would help them believe they can make up new ways to communicate too?" The sophistication of this question left both Sarah and Marcus momentarily speechless. Oliver was thinking about the psychological impact of his demonstration on other children, understanding that witnessing peer success could inspire confidence and risk-taking in others. "I think that's exactly the kind of inspiration other children need to see," Sarah said seriously. You're showing them that communication isn't just about following rules or copying what adults teach. It's about creativity and finding your own ways to connect with others. The conversation that followed would prove to be pivotal in Oliver's development and in Marcus's understanding of his son's potential role in helping other children. Oliver, when you work with other kids, some of them might feel nervous or scared at first, Sarah explained. How do you think you could help them feel more comfortable? Oliver considered this question with the same focused attention he applied to complex problems. I could show them that making mistakes is okay, because I made lots of mistakes when I was learning, and I could let them try the easy commands first, like I did. What else might help nervous kids? Sarah prompted. Maybe I could tell them about how the dogs are really nice and they want to help us learn, and I could show them that the dogs listen to kids just like they listen to grown-ups. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion as he listened to his son's thoughtful responses. Oliver was demonstrating empathy, strategic thinking, and genuine understanding of how to support others facing challenges similar to his own. Those are excellent ideas, Sarah said. What about kids who get frustrated when things are hard? Oliver's face scrunched in concentration. When I get frustrated, it helps when someone reminds me about the things I already learned how to do. So maybe I could remind them about their successes. The emotional intelligence and practical wisdom in this response was breathtaking. Oliver was applying his own coping strategies to help others, demonstrating the kind of peer mentoring skills that professional counselors spent years developing. Oliver, I think you're ready to meet the other children, Sarah concluded. But I want you to remember that your job isn't to fix their problems or make them learn faster. Your job is just to be yourself. Share your excitement about communication and let them see what's possible. I understand, Oliver said seriously. I just want to be a good friend and help them have fun with the dogs. That weekend, Marcus accompanied Oliver to his first group session, uncertain what to expect, but filled with anticipation about his son's next step in this remarkable journey. The community center where Sarah held her group sessions was a modest building with large windows and an open floor plan that had been adapted specifically for animal-assisted therapy. When they arrived, Marcus could see 3 children already seated in a circle with their parents nearby, all looking various degrees of nervous and hopeful. Sarah made the introductions with her characteristic warmth and professionalism. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Oliver. He's been working with Max, Bella, and Rex, and he's learned some amazing communication skills that I thought you might enjoy seeing. Emma, the 7-year-old with selective mutism, was sitting very close to her mother, her eyes wide with curiosity, but her mouth firmly closed. David, the 9-year-old with autism, was studying the 3 dogs with intense focus, clearly fascinated by their disciplined positioning. Maria, the 8-year-old with apraxia, was trying to whisper something to her father, but struggling with the coordination needed to produce clear sounds. Oliver surveyed the group with the same thoughtful expression Marcus had seen him use when approaching new challenges. Then he did something that immediately changed the entire atmosphere of the room. He walked to the center of the circle, positioned himself where all the children could see him clearly, and said, "Hi everyone, I'm Oliver, and I used to be really scared to talk in front of people too." The simple honesty and vulnerability of this introduction created an immediate connection with the other children. Emma's rigid posture relaxed slightly. David shifted his attention from the dogs to Oliver. Maria stopped struggling with her whispered conversation and focused entirely on this new boy who understood something about communication challenges. "But these dogs taught me that talking can be fun instead of scary," Oliver continued. Do you want to see how they helped me learn? Without waiting for verbal responses, Oliver launched into a demonstration that was both educational and entertaining. He started with the basic commands the other children could observe and understand, then gradually built up to more complex interactions. What made his demonstration particularly effective was how he narrated his own thought processes and mistakes alongside his successes. When I first tried to make Max sit, I said the word wrong and he got confused. Oliver explained, intentionally mispronouncing the command to show the children what had happened. But Sarah taught me that making mistakes is how we figure out the right way to do things. Emma giggled softly at Oliver's exaggerated mispronunciation, the first sound she'd made since arriving. And when I was learning to give commands to all 3 dogs at once, I forgot Bella's name and just pointed at her. Oliver continued, demonstrating the gesture. But Bella still tried to help me because dogs are really good at understanding what we want, even when we don't say it perfectly. David raised his hand, something his parents later said he rarely did in group settings. How did you remember all 3 names when your brain was thinking about the commands too? The question demonstrated David's understanding of the cognitive complexity involved in Oliver's demonstrations, and his willingness to engage verbally with a peer was a significant breakthrough. That's a really smart question, Oliver replied, treating David's inquiry with the same seriousness an adult might show. I had to practice saying the names lots of times when the dogs weren't even here. Want to see how I practiced? Oliver proceeded to demonstrate his practice routine using stuffed animals, showing the children how learning could continue even when the therapy dogs weren't present. This revelation seemed to intrigue all 3 children, suggesting possibilities for independent skill development. Maria raised her hand tentatively, then struggled to form words clearly enough for others to understand. Oliver waited patiently while she worked through the pronunciation challenges, never showing impatience or trying to guess what she was attempting to say. You made the dogs listen to you, Maria finally managed, her face showing both effort and pride at completing the sentence. Yes, Oliver replied enthusiastically, and they listened because I used my voice with confidence. Sarah taught me that dogs can hear when we believe in ourselves. This response addressed not just Maria's observation, but also the underlying confidence issues that affected all the children in the group. Sarah had been observing this interaction with obvious professional satisfaction, and now she stepped forward to structure the next phase of the session. Oliver has shown us some wonderful examples of communication and leadership, she said. Now I'd like everyone to try working with the dogs themselves, with Oliver helping as a peer mentor. What followed was an hour of breakthrough moments that would be remembered by every parent in the room. Emma, who hadn't spoken to anyone outside her family in months, whispered "sit" to Bella and watched in amazement as the dog immediately complied. The success gave her enough confidence to try "down" and eventually to speak loudly enough for the entire group to hear. David, whose social communication challenges typically made group activities difficult, found himself naturally coordinating with Oliver to create complex sequences of commands that required teamwork and verbal planning. Maria discovered that the dogs responded to her attempts at speech, even when her pronunciation wasn't perfect, giving her the confidence to keep trying and gradually improve her clarity through repeated practice. But perhaps most remarkably, Oliver demonstrated natural teaching abilities that surprised even Sarah. He instinctively knew when to offer help and when to step back and let the other children figure things out independently. He celebrated every small success with genuine enthusiasm, and he responded to frustrations with the kind of patient encouragement that professional therapists spent years learning to provide. Oliver, Sarah said as the session was winding down, how did you know exactly when to help each child and when to let them work independently? Oliver thought about this question seriously before answering. I remembered how it felt when I was learning. Sometimes I wanted help, and sometimes I wanted to try by myself. So I tried to watch their faces and see what they needed. The emotional intelligence and observational skills reflected in this response were extraordinary for a child of any age, but particularly remarkable for someone who had been considered developmentally delayed just weeks earlier. As the families prepared to leave, each of the other children approached Oliver to thank him or share something about their experience. Emma walked up to him and in a clear voice that made her parents tear up, said, "Thank you for showing me that talking can be fun." David shook Oliver's hand formally and said, "I would like to work with you again because you understand how my brain thinks about problems." Maria gave Oliver a hug and managed to say, "You helped me not be scared of my voice." The impact of Oliver's peer mentoring was undeniable, but what struck Marcus most was how much his son had gained from the experience of helping others. During the drive home, Oliver was more animated and talkative than Marcus had ever seen him. "Dad, did you see how Emma's face changed when Bella listened to her? And did you notice how David figured out that pattern with the commands? And Maria's voice got clearer every time she tried." Oliver's ability to observe and analyze the other children's progress demonstrated sophisticated social awareness and genuine investment in their success. "You were an excellent teacher today," Marcus said. "How did it feel to help other kids learn?" Oliver considered this question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "It felt different from learning by myself. When I help other kids, I understand my own learning better too, and it makes me happy to see them discover they can do things they didn't know they could do." The wisdom and maturity in this reflection was breathtaking. Oliver was articulating insights about teaching and learning that professional educators might take years to develop. "Do you want to continue working with the group?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Oliver replied without hesitation. "But Dad, I also want to keep learning new things myself. Maybe Sarah can teach me more advanced skills that I can share with other kids later." Marcus realized that his son was thinking strategically about his own development in the context of how he could serve others, demonstrating the kind of leadership mindset that would serve him throughout his life. That evening, as Marcus tucked Oliver into bed, his son looked up at him with the bright, confident expression that had become his new normal. "Dad, I think I understand something important now," Oliver said seriously. "What's that?" Marcus asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I used to think that having trouble with talking meant I couldn't do important things, but now I know that learning to overcome challenges makes me better at helping other people who have challenges too." The profound wisdom of this insight took Marcus's breath away. His son had not only overcome significant obstacles, but had transformed those struggles into a source of strength and purpose. "That's a very wise understanding, Oliver," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "And Dad," Oliver continued, "I think that's why Sarah and the dogs came to find me that day. Not just to help me learn to talk, but to help me learn that I could help other kids too." As Marcus kissed his son goodnight and turned off the light, he realized that Oliver's journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The boy who had been seen as having limitations was revealing himself to be someone with extraordinary gifts for communication, leadership, and service to others. The billionaire who had built an empire on technological innovation was discovering that his greatest legacy would be watching his son develop into someone who could transform the lives of countless other children simply by sharing his own journey of discovery and growth. Outside Oliver's window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and Marcus found himself filled with excitement about all the possibilities that lay ahead for his remarkable son. The following months unfolded like pages in a book that Marcus had never dared to imagine writing. Oliver's transformation from a withdrawn child struggling with communication to a confident young leader helping other children discover their own voices became the cornerstone of what would eventually reshape multiple lives across their community. Sarah's program expanded rapidly as word spread about the remarkable results she was achieving. The waiting list grew to over 40 children, each family desperately seeking the kind of breakthrough that Oliver had experienced. But rather than simply scaling up her existing approach, Sarah made a decision that would prove pivotal for everyone involved. "Marcus, I have a proposition," Sarah said during one of their regular progress meetings. "Oliver has demonstrated such exceptional mentoring abilities that I'd like to structure a formal peer leadership program around his participation. Instead of just helping other children occasionally, he could become a central part of helping kids discover their communication potential." Oliver, who had been working with Rex on a complex series of commands nearby, immediately perked up at the conversation. His ability to multitask while maintaining awareness of important discussions around him had become one of his most remarkable developments. "What would that mean exactly?" Marcus asked, though he could see the excitement building in his son's expression. "It would mean training Oliver in more advanced communication techniques, not just for his own development, but so he could teach them to other children," Sarah explained. "We'd create structured mentoring opportunities where Oliver works with small groups of kids, helping them progress through the same stages he mastered." Oliver approached the adults with the confident stride that had replaced his previous hesitant movements. "Sarah, would I be like a teacher? Could I help kids learn the advanced commands and leadership skills?" The eagerness in his voice was matched by a maturity that continued to astound Marcus. His son wasn't just interested in the recognition or responsibility. He was genuinely excited about the opportunity to impact other children's lives. "You'd be exactly like a teacher," Sarah confirmed. "But more than that, you'd be proof to other children that someone who faced similar challenges could not only overcome them, but could achieve things that seemed impossible." What followed was an intensive training period where Oliver learned not just advanced communication techniques, but the fundamentals of patience, encouragement, and adaptive instruction that professional educators spent years mastering. Sarah introduced concepts like reading body language, recognizing when someone needed encouragement versus when they needed space, and adapting explanations to different learning styles. Oliver absorbed these lessons with the same focused intensity he'd applied to learning dog commands, but with an additional layer of emotional intelligence that surprised everyone. "Oliver, when you're working with a child who seems frustrated, what do you think they need most?" Sarah asked during one of their training sessions. Oliver's response demonstrated the kind of insight that would make him an exceptional mentor. "I think they need to remember that frustration means they're trying something hard, which means they're being brave. So maybe I should tell them they're being brave, and then show them a smaller step that feels easier." This understanding of emotional support, combined with practical problem-solving, created a mentoring approach that proved remarkably effective with the children Oliver began working with regularly. Emma, the girl with selective mutism, made perhaps the most dramatic progress under Oliver's guidance. What professional therapists had struggled to achieve over months, Oliver accomplished through simple peer connection and shared experience. "Emma, I know talking to new people feels scary, Oliver said during one of their sessions together. But look, when you whisper to Bella, she listens just as carefully as when you talk in your regular voice. That means your quiet voice is still powerful. This reframe of Emma's whispering as a strength rather than a limitation gave her a foundation of confidence to build upon. Within weeks, she was speaking audibly during group sessions and eventually began initiating conversations with other children outside the program. David, the boy with autism, connected with Oliver's systematic approach to learning and began developing his own methods for teaching communication skills to newer children in the program. Their collaboration created a peer-to-peer learning dynamic that exceeded anything Sarah had seen in traditional therapeutic settings. Oliver, I've been thinking about the pattern of how we teach the dogs, David said during one session. If we arrange the commands in a specific sequence based on complexity, other kids might learn faster because they'd build on previous successes. Oliver considered this suggestion with the same seriousness he'd give to an adult's input. That's really smart, David. Want to try designing a teaching sequence together and see if it works with the new kids next week? This kind of collaborative problem-solving between the children created innovations in the program that Sarah began incorporating into her professional methodology. Maria's progress with speech clarity accelerated dramatically when Oliver helped her understand that communication was about connection rather than perfection. Maria, when you tell Max to sit and he sits, that means he understood exactly what you wanted him to do, Oliver explained patiently. It doesn't matter if the word sounded different from how Sarah says it. What matters is that you made something happen with your voice. This emphasis on functional communication over perfect pronunciation gave Maria the confidence to practice more frequently and with greater enthusiasm, leading to natural improvements in her speech clarity. But perhaps the most significant development was how Oliver's role as a mentor began attracting attention from education professionals and child development specialists throughout the region. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the director of pediatric speech therapy at Children's Hospital, requested a meeting with Sarah and Marcus after hearing about Oliver's remarkable progress and mentoring abilities. What I'm seeing in your documentation of Oliver's development challenges everything we understand about traditional therapy timelines and methodologies, Dr. Hendricks explained during their meeting. The speed of his progress and his ability to help other children achieve similar breakthroughs suggests we may need to completely rethink our approaches. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of having his son's abilities analyzed by professionals who were reconsidering their own expertise. What specifically do you think makes Oliver's approach so effective? Marcus asked. Several factors, Dr. Hendricks replied, consulting her notes. First, peer learning eliminates the power differential that can inhibit progress in adult-child therapeutic relationships. Second, Oliver's own recent experience with communication challenges makes him uniquely empathetic and understanding. Third, his natural enthusiasm and confidence create an emotional environment where other children feel safe to take risks. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. But I think there's something even more fundamental happening. Oliver isn't trying to fix other children or correct their deficits. He's showing them possibilities and letting them discover their own capabilities. This philosophical difference between deficit-focused intervention and strength-based mentoring became the foundation for a research collaboration that would eventually impact thousands of children. Dr. Hendricks proposed a formal study of Oliver's mentoring methods, with the goal of training other successful program graduates to become peer mentors in their own communities. We're looking at the possibility of creating a replicable model where children who achieve communication breakthroughs through animal-assisted programs could become mentors for newer participants, Dr. Hendricks explained. Oliver could be our prototype for developing training curricula and assessment methods. Oliver listened to this conversation with obvious interest, but his response demonstrated the maturity and wisdom that had become characteristic of his thinking. Dr. Hendricks, I want to help other programs, but I also want to make sure we don't turn helping kids into something that feels like work instead of friendship, he said thoughtfully. The best part about working with Emma and David and Maria is that we're friends who help each other learn. This insight about maintaining the authentic relational foundation of peer mentoring while creating systematic training approaches became central to the research design. Over the following months, Oliver participated in video documentation of his mentoring sessions, helped develop training materials for other potential peer mentors, and consulted on program design elements that would preserve the natural, friendship-based dynamics that made his approach so effective. The research results were extraordinary. Children who worked with Oliver and other trained peer mentors achieved communication breakthroughs an average of 60% faster than those in traditional therapy programs alone. More importantly, their improvements were more sustained and generalized to multiple environments and relationships. Marcus watched his son's evolution from someone who needed help to someone who provided leadership with a mixture of pride and amazement that never diminished. During one particularly memorable session, Oliver was working with a new group of children who had just joined the program. Among them was a 6-year-old boy named Jason, who had been completely nonverbal since a traumatic accident that had left him with both physical and emotional challenges. Oliver approached Jason with the same patient confidence he'd developed with all the children he mentored, but this case would test the limits of his abilities and demonstrate the full extent of his growth. "Hi, Jason," Oliver said, settling onto the grass beside the silent boy. "I'm Oliver, and these are my friends Max, Bella, and Rex. They're really good listeners, and they like to learn new things just like us." Jason stared at the dogs with obvious fascination, but remained completely silent and motionless. Oliver didn't push for interaction or try to coax responses. Instead, he began working with the dogs while maintaining a gentle commentary that Jason could observe and absorb without pressure. "Max, I'm going to ask you to show Jason how good you are at listening," Oliver said, making the sit command. "See how Max heard my voice and knew exactly what I wanted him to do? That's because voices are powerful, even when they're quiet." Over the course of several sessions, Oliver gradually included Jason in simple activities that didn't require verbal responses. He'd have Jason help position treats for the dogs, or hold leashes while Oliver gave commands, or simply pat the animals when they completed tasks successfully. The breakthrough came during their 4th session together. Jason had been watching Oliver coordinate a complex sequence involving all 3 dogs when suddenly he reached out and tugged on Oliver's sleeve. When Oliver turned to him, Jason pointed to Bella and made a gesture that clearly indicated he wanted the dog to come closer. "You want Bella to come to you?" Oliver asked gently. Jason nodded, his first clear communication since joining the program. "Study on Niho." "Bella, come," Oliver said, and the dog immediately trotted over to Jason, who broke into the first smile anyone had seen from him in months. But what happened next demonstrated the full extent of Oliver's development as a mentor and communicator. Instead of celebrating the breakthrough or drawing attention to Jason's progress, Oliver simply continued the session as if Jason's participation was completely natural and expected. "Jason's really good at understanding what the dogs need," Oliver commented casually to Sarah, treating Jason's nonverbal communication as a valuable contribution rather than a limitation to be overcome. This approach of normalizing Jason's current abilities while creating opportunities for growth proved to be exactly what the boy needed. Over the following weeks, Jason began making quiet sounds, then whispered words, and eventually clear vocalizations as his confidence grew. The success with Jason caught the attention of trauma specialists, who were amazed by Oliver's intuitive understanding of how to create safe spaces for healing and growth. Dr. Amanda Foster, a pediatric trauma therapist, began consulting with Sarah's program to understand how Oliver's approach could be applied to other children dealing with trauma-related communication challenges. Oliver seems to understand instinctively that healing happens in relationships built on acceptance and possibility rather than diagnosis and correction. Dr. Foster observed, after watching several of his mentoring sessions, Marcus found himself increasingly amazed by his son's natural wisdom and the impact it was having on professional practices. But perhaps the most significant validation of Oliver's development came from an unexpected source. The school district that had previously recommended Oliver for special education placement due to his communication delays now requested that he participate in their gifted and talented program based on his demonstrated leadership abilities and advanced social-emotional intelligence. Oliver's assessment scores in areas like empathy, problem-solving, and peer leadership are in the 99th percentile, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the district's gifted education coordinator. His ability to understand complex social dynamics and adapt his communication to meet others' needs suggests exceptional intellectual and emotional capabilities. Marcus remembered the early assessments that had suggested Oliver's cognitive development was significantly delayed, and he marveled at how completely those evaluations had misunderstood his son's actual potential. What would participation in the gifted program involve? Marcus asked. We'd like Oliver to help develop peer mentoring programs in our schools, Dr. Walsh explained. His experience working with children who have various learning and communication challenges could inform how we support all students in developing confidence and connection. Oliver listened to this conversation with obvious interest, but his response demonstrated the thoughtful consideration that had become characteristic of his decision-making. Dr. Walsh, I want to help kids at school too, but I also want to keep working with Sarah and the dogs and the kids in our program, he said seriously. Could I do both? Absolutely, Dr. Walsh replied. In fact, we were hoping your school involvement could complement and extend the work you're already doing. What emerged was a comprehensive approach, where Oliver split his time between Sarah's animal-assisted program and school-based peer mentoring initiatives that brought his methods to a much broader population of children. The results were transformative not just for individual students, but for entire classroom cultures and school environments. Teachers reported that Oliver's presence and mentoring created more inclusive, supportive dynamics, where children with various challenges felt valued and capable rather than marginalized or different. Oliver has this remarkable ability to help children see their own strengths and possibilities, reported Mrs. Karen Liu, a third-grade teacher who worked with Oliver regularly. He doesn't focus on what kids can't do. He helps them discover what they can do and builds from there. This strength-based approach began influencing how teachers throughout the district thought about student support and classroom management. The ripple effects extended beyond individual children to their families, who found themselves with more confident, communicative children who were eager to share their learning and help others. Emma's mother wrote a letter to the school board describing how her daughter had gone from being too anxious to speak in public to volunteering to give presentations and help younger children with their own shyness. David's parents reported that their son had begun developing his own teaching materials and methods for helping children with autism develop social communication skills. Maria's family celebrated as their daughter not only achieved clear speech, but became an advocate for other children with speech challenges, explaining to classmates and teachers how to create supportive environments for communication development. But for Marcus, the most meaningful transformation was watching his son discover his own sense of purpose and identity. Oliver no longer saw himself as someone who had overcome a disability. Instead, he understood himself as someone with unique gifts for understanding, connecting with, and empowering other children. "Dad, I think I know what I want to be when I grow up," Oliver announced one evening as they sat together reviewing his day's activities. "What's that?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I want to be someone who helps kids discover they can do amazing things they didn't know they could do," Oliver said, with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. "Maybe I'll be a teacher, or maybe I'll work with animals and kids like Sarah does, or maybe I'll invent something completely new." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion as he listened to his son's vision for his future. "Whatever you choose to do, Oliver, I know you'll be exceptional at it," Marcus said softly. "Thanks, Dad. But you know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "I get to start helping kids right now. I don't have to wait until I grow up to make a difference." The wisdom and purpose in Oliver's perspective represented a transformation that extended far beyond overcoming communication challenges. His son had discovered not just his voice, but his calling. As Marcus tucked Oliver into bed that night, he reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with a chance encounter between his son and a woman with 3 therapy dogs on the manicured lawn of an exclusive country club. What had started as a desperate father's hope for his struggling child had evolved into something far more significant. Oliver's breakthrough had become a catalyst for transforming how entire communities approached childhood development, education, and the recognition of human potential. The billionaire who had once measured success in terms of market dominance and financial achievements now understood that his greatest accomplishment would always be watching his son discover the power of his own voice and use it to lift others toward their own possibilities. Outside Oliver's window, the city lights twinkled with promise, and Marcus found himself filled with excitement about all the lives his remarkable son would continue to touch and transform in the years ahead. The boy who had once been seen as limited by his challenges had become living proof that extraordinary potential exists within every child, waiting for the right moment, the right approach, and the right encouragement to shine.